Hello and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowres, and once again, this podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, Women Beyond 40. I like to call it Lube for Your Mind. You can check us out at wb40.com. Today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which this podcast is recorded, and that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and those emerging. I am very, very excited to have Sonya Lovell in the podcast today. She joins me in the confessional to talk about all things menopause, and not just menopause, but all the things that are associated with that. Sonya is a powerhouse. She is a personal trainer, but also she runs a fantastic platform called Stellar Women, and she is the writer and host of an amazing podcast called Dear Menopause, which I love, and I am very lucky to have been a guest on. It's a fantastic platform for women. She is an advocate for women, for education around perimenopause and menopause, and to find your joy and spark in life in midlife and beyond. We love that. She's very aligned with everything that WB40 stands for and the Good Girl Confessional. Please welcome her to the confessional, the wonderful Sonya Lovell.
Hey, it's another Sandy here, Sandy Davies. I'm the founder and formulator of Happy Pause Balm for intimate dryness. Find us over at happypause.com.au. That's happypause.com.au. And get some happy on down there. And in the meantime, keep listening to Powerhouse Sandy Lowres on the Good Girl Confessional podcast, where every woman has a story.
Hello, gorgeous Sonya, and welcome to the confessional. How are you?
Hi, Sandy. I am so good, and I'm on a little bit of a giggly high because I have been so excited to talk to you today.
Well, I'm feeling the same way. I feel like you and I are so aligned in terms of what we're all about and what we are trying to achieve for women. And for me, it's like a very pro-aging, changing the narrative around women as we age. But for you, I love everything that you do. You advocate so much for women in the grip of perimenopause and menopause, and all the great things that come with it, as well as all the health things that come with it, all of it. How did it, I'm just in love with everything that you do, but tell me how the inspiration for your amazing podcast, Dear Menopause, how did that come about?
Oh, wow. Such a good question. So the podcast came about. I love talking. And anyone that has listened to the podcast will understand that actually one of the very first things that I had to teach myself to do was not talk so much, and to let my guests actually take the driver's seat at different times. But yeah, so I have actually co-hosted a podcast way back in a whole other life, basically, almost before podcasting was a thing, and it was fun and I loved it, and I always knew that I wanted to do another podcast at some point in time. It is literally like podcasting was designed for me. And so then when I started Stellar Women, which was my platform where I knew that I wanted to provide support and education and a community for women through this stage of their life, the podcast for me was always a natural extension of that. And it's really quite interesting that I had a conversation with a business coach that I was working with right in the very early stages of Stellar Women. And I said to her, I want to start a podcast. And she was like, oh no, you're going to have to put that idea on the back burner. You know, before you do that, you need to have programs and you need to have, you know, all these products rolled out. And I was like, no, I want to do the podcast first. And she was really advising against that. And I actually ended up moving on from that relationship because I was so adamant that the podcast was something that I wanted to do. And I'm so glad that I followed my gut instinct with that.
Oh, yeah. Wow. I'm glad that you did as well, because I'm a huge fan of the podcast, but also the topic, right? Because, I don't understand. You and I have chatted about this before, but I don't understand why menopause, has this kind of weird taboo-y kind of thing about it. And I don't really understand why.
I know. It really does. And it is strange because it is literally as simple as being the bookend to our periods or, our period of fertility, which starts with our periods and ends with menopause. And look, I know that if we went back in time as time travelers, there was probably not people talking about periods either, and that was all being brushed under the rug, and girls were struggling to find support around that. So I think menopause is probably just going through that same cycle, but it's weird that it's 2023 and we're in that space.
Right? It's so crazy. And as you know, like part of my platform is a magazine, and we talk deliberately about menopause in one way or another, usually in every issue, but we've got the website and we constantly put up articles about menopause because I think I found for me personally, when I hit perimenopause, I kind of had no idea, what was going on. And I mean, I kind of had a sense. I thought, I'm pretty sure this is what it is. But I had to do my own research, right?
Yeah.
I had to get online and go. And then I was like, why is no one talking about this? And all of a sudden, like I'm very, very grateful to have this kind of gorgeous group of girlfriends that I grew up with. And so we went through all of our periods together and getting boobs together and first boyfriends and all whatever, divorces, remarriages, you name it, we've been there. Kids.
All the good things in life.
All of it. But what happened was we all really hit perimenopause around the same time.
Yeah, which totally makes sense.
Totally makes sense. But it's so different for every woman, right? And so suddenly we were like, I'm pretty sure I've got perimenopause. And one of my girlfriends said, oh, me too. And I'm on HRT patches and it's like a game changer. And we were like, what? And suddenly we're having these huge conversations because we were all in it, right?
But you're so lucky to have that because so many women don't have that.
Oh, too many women don't. And this is what I've discovered as well. And that's why I love what you're doing and why I think it's so important that we are part of a movement now, which is so amazing, right? And I'm part of it. You're part of it, in this sisterhood, because the reality is we're all going to go through it.
That's exactly right. And if we're all going to go through it, then we might as well all be in it together and we might as well be talking about it. Like, it just makes sense to me. I'm a talker. I talk. I've always been very transparent all my life. I think there's very little about my life that people don't know if they know me well, or they've listened to the podcast. So don't even need they know my voice well. I am a big believer in being open and transparent and talking, and I believe that it helps others heal. It helps others feel seen. And it also helps us as well. It's helped me at different times in my life cope with what I've been going through. Although I am also a very big believer in, there's a saying that I came across, which I really love. And that is that we share from the scab, not from the wound. And I'm a really, really big believer in going through what you're going through, learn what you learn, don't share until it is right for you. But then when you have moved into that place where it's a bit more scabby than it is open flesh wound, then, by all means, if sharing is your thing, share.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think that I'm a huge advocate for creating space for women to share their stories when they're ready to, if they're ready to, because the reality is, and I know we're both on the same page with each other on this, is that it's not always easy for people to share their stories, especially women. We are raised in a very patriarchal societal kind of thing that says, be quiet, stay quiet. The Good Girl Confessional podcast, the name is a nod to exactly that. It's a cheeky nod to, these kind of systems set up where we're all meant to be good, be a good girl and be quiet and right. Yes, and yes. I was anything but, So
was I.
So I think this notion of good, or this notion of, keeps women really in, in their place, if you like. That's what society tries to do.
It's the patriarchy that does it. It is really, we have to be completely honest. We live in a very patriarchal driven society. And, that is what the patriarchy wants to do with us. And I feel like such a rebel and, agitator when I say that. But, it really is so true. And I've had so many conversations with, I had a fascinating conversation recently with Zali Steggall, who is a member of parliament. So she's a female politician. And we were talking specifically about women's healthcare and, obviously around perimenopause, menopause. And she was really open about saying one of the reasons why healthcare for women has been, under supported and underfunded is because most of the decisions being made in government have been made by men.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the big decision makers tend to be men. And it's quite distressing when you think about how little is actually spent on women's health. I recently shared a video that someone else had put up. It wasn't mine, but I happily shared this on my platform. A video, it was in America. It was, a female practitioner kind of conference going on. And they asked all of these women, what did you've probably seen it, but, how much did you learn about menopause when you were at university?
Part of your training.
So shocking. Like when they were all really honest, which was great. They were like, one of them's like, oh, nothing. I basically had to go away and study it myself. And
well, it is actually a globally recognized education gap, and it's a massive problem. And it's actually something that I posed to Zali when I spoke to her. I was like, look, I know you're probably not the person to answer this, but this is a problem nationally that we need to address. Where does the guidance come from, I guess, for our tertiary institutions to say this curriculum needs an overhaul? Who drives that? Where does that come from? Is it from government? Is it from within the tertiary institutes themselves? It is. And it's the fact it's a global education gap is just horrendous, which makes me think that the United Nations probably should be involved somewhere along the way.
It seems such a bizarre concept, really. When we're saying it out loud, it seems even weirder. It's like when you go, well, women hold up half the sky, right? So,
just over. We're actually carrying more of the sky than the men, let's be honest.
There you go. So, like, the reality is that, like, anyone who's, born female,
assigned female gender at birth,
is likely to go through will go through menopause.
Well, they will
right?
go through menopause. Yeah,
they will. And the reality is, the symptoms for everyone can be radically different. For some women, they suffer a lot, and for some women, they don't. But the first port of call usually is you go to your GP and you say, "I'm not really sure what's going on, what's happening." I was very lucky that I went, and my GP's female and she's in her late 40s, and she got it straight away and said, join the club. Like, I'm pretty sure you're going through perimenopause and let's take some blood tests and blah, blah, right? Now, the blood test doesn't automatically say you're going through perimenopause, but what they can, right?
I would actually like to say, just to interject there slightly, is that there is actually no testing that's to be done for perimenopause, and this is something that's a little bit muddy in the zeitgeist out there at the moment, because I overhear or get women say to me all the time, "Oh, I'm perimenopausal. I asked my GP to do a blood test, and it proved I wasn't." And I'm like, well, actually,
wow.
Because and this is where women need to really understand. So we talk about the fluctuating hormones of estrogen and progesterone during your perimenopausal stage. Those fluctuations can be as much of a roller coaster as you could have a blood test done at 9 a.m. in the morning and it could say that your estrogen's high. You could have a blood test done at 5 p.m. that afternoon and your estrogen will be low. And the result that your GP gives you is going to be dependent on this really teeny tiny snapshot of time that isn't indicative of actually what's happening over a period of time. So we can blood test for post-menopause or the day of menopause, like once you're 12 months past that last period, they can do blood tests to check what your FSH is at that point. But prior to that, no blood test will actually define where you sit in that spectrum. And it's something that I wish we could clear up, because there are too many people out there that talk about having blood tests done for perimenopause, and it's not indicative of anything.
No, and thank you very much for saying that and that's what I mean by I had a good GP because she said, let's do some blood tests. But what the blood tests were about were let's rule out other things that might be going on for you.
Yes. She
Let's
was a
not,
good GP.
very good, because what she said was, and rightly so, yeah, we can check your hormone levels, but the reality is what I want to know is there other stuff going on that could be missed because you
Yeah.
are
And
perimenopausal, right?
that's right. And that's the other thing that we have to be really cognizant of is perimenopause symptoms also mimic symptoms of much more severe conditions. So we have to also be very careful that we don't just go, oh, well, I'm hearing everyone talk about perimenopause. Yep, this could be perimenopause. So you don't go and get it checked out by a GP. We do have to be conscious of the fact that every symptom that is severe enough for you to be in discomfort or to be out of the norm must be checked out by a GP or your preferred health professional. If you're someone that doesn't see GPs and you have a great naturopath, then please go and talk to them instead. But everything that's a little bit out of the norm and does make you question what's going on should always be checked out first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because a couple of years ago I saw a doctor for something completely different, and I went there and I said, got all these things going on, and he said to me, and this really pisses me off, and this happens to so many women in our age bracket. He looked me in the face and said, we didn't take blood pressure, didn't suggest any blood tests, didn't anything, just said to me, you're probably stressed, are you? You're probably stressed at home. You're probably stressed at work. I just looked at him and I said, with all due respect, if I was a man who walked in here with these symptoms, would you be saying that to me without even taking so much as my blood pressure? And I think
Good for you.
I did. I was just so taken aback. But I think then he was so taken aback that I said it, because I said to him, anything could be going on with me. And you're just sitting here assuming because I'm a woman that it must be psychological. There's something, you know what I mean? And he said, oh, no, that's not what I meant. I thought, how many women have walked in and seen that
Actually,
person?
it was.
It actually is exactly what you did.
Yeah, and it's the equivalent of kind of patting you on the head as a child and going, there, dear, you'll be okay.
Right? And so then I actually said to him, he said, oh, we can do some and I said, no, that's okay. I think I'd really like to see another doctor. And I was really taken aback. I just thought, really? And I thought, if you're not a person who feels you can advocate for yourself, right, what will happen is those people will walk out the door and may have serious things going on and be completely ignored because purely on the basis of you're a woman, which is just shitful.
Absolutely shitful. And the other problem is that, we have a very, very messed up Medicare system, and and that plays a massive part in the amount of time that women in particular get in front of their GPs. We're talking about seeing GPs here rather than someone like a naturopath, completely different scenario. But if you're sitting in front of a GP, you've likely waited in the waiting room for over 30 minutes. If you're lucky, you're then getting maybe 5 minutes of FaceTime with them. And in that time, you are expected to describe what's going on succinctly and back up why you think that it's relevant that you're there asking questions about it, and hoping that they're not going to just pat you on the head and say, there, darling, you're probably a little bit tired. You're a bit stressed at the moment. The kid's okay. How's hubby? Is he a bit stressed too? It's the system really is stacked against us, and there is so much bias in the system.
Yeah, a crazy amount of bias. And part of that is the lack of education, as we were saying before, for general practitioners. There is a genuine lack of, education for them around women's health in general, especially when around perimenopause, menopause. And in fact, I asked my GP about this as well, about how much did she learn about it. And she said that, it was like, I think she said it was something like half a chapter. This is Australia, right? So half a chapter in a medical book or whatever, and they spent very little time on it.
It's amazing when I do speak to women, and I have conversations like this with women who do have empathetic and understanding GPs that do help and support them. Most of the time, those GPs end up being women, and they are women that have been through perimenopause themselves, and they've had to go and do the research themselves on themselves to then be able to support their patients. It's and it's a shame that there's not more women GPs out there, unfortunately, because they are the ones that get it, and they're the ones, especially the ones that have been through it.
Yeah, look, I agree. Yeah, it's a little bit mind blowing, but these pretty amazing women who have to teach themselves as they're going through it. The problem is there's not enough of them to go
No.
around, right? So I
Yeah.
always say, my big thing is I always say to people, if you go to a doctor and you're brushed off, regardless of what is going on with you, please, please, please go and find another one. And I know that's frustrating and I know that it's hard, but in the end, it's your health, right? As women, it's a bit shitful that we have to walk into a GP and advocate for ourselves. And we almost, as you said before, you have to kind of know what's going on in some sense at least, because when you walk in, if you go, look, I don't really know, or, then they go, okay, yep, it's like pat you on the head, see you later.
Yeah.
We have to advocate for ourselves. The other problem too, I don't know what you think about this, but a lot of women, because we're bloody busy and we are juggling a lot, and a lot of women tend to be taking care of children and partners and working and
aging
parents in this sandwich generation. So what we tend to do, a lot of us, is you tend to bank up all the things you need to talk to the GP about. So when you finally go, oh, damn it, all right, I'm doing it, you finally get to the GP, you've probably got a list of 3, 4, 5 things that you want to talk to them about, and you'll probably cover off 1 or 2 if you're lucky.
Yeah. So the biggest piece of advice that I always give, well, actually, there's a few pieces of advice that I always give women when it comes to talking to your GP. And I learned this from a GP. I've been lucky enough to have interviewed over 50 amazing experts and GPs on my podcast. And so I always learn from them so that I can take that information and distill it out to the women that I speak to. But when you're preparing for a GP appointment, and I would pretty much say this goes for any appointment, regardless of what it is you're going in to see them about, ask for a long appointment. So when you ring, or if you're booking online, always book a long appointment. You totally nailed it. Go in armed with a list of what you want to talk about, because it's very easy once you're in there to either forget what it was that you wanted to talk about, or you get sidetracked by a question that they ask you. So definitely go in with a list. When it comes to perimenopause and menopause symptoms, if you are in the situation where perhaps you feel that your doctor's not listening to you, or you've had an experience with them in the past and they haven't really listened to you, and maybe you're in a regional or remote area of Australia, you don't actually have the luxury of just going and seeing another GP down the road, because we also have this horrendous GP shortage nationally. Go in armed with the research that you have been able to do yourself. Now, that doesn't mean I listened to a podcast and Sonya Lovell said blah, 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 blah. As much as that sounds amazing, your GP is probably going to go, yeah, right. The Australasian Menopause Society, Jean Hales, have brilliant resources on their website that you can download and print off 1 or 2 page PDFs. But what's super important about those documents is that they're all referred back to the clinical papers where the research was done. So if you sit down in front of your GP and you go, I think I'm perimenopausal, this piece of paper, which is clinically researched and referenced, backs up what I'm saying, it's very hard for them to not take you seriously.
Yeah, God, I love that advice. That's great advice, honestly. Because I know for me, one of the first references that I found when I was doing my own research, because I was going through it, was Jean Hales. And I remember going, what an extraordinary centre, because as you say, there's so much information on that site. And, since then I found others which have been amazing. But what a great piece of advice, because I didn't even really think to do that, to like print it out and take it with you and kind of go, here.
It's very hard for someone to not take you seriously when you're kind of matching them with, okay, but look, I've got this.
Yeah, and are you going to tell me that this incredible piece of research is wrong?
Yeah.
No, I think that's really important as well. I think it's kind of fascinating now too. I'm loving this new movement that is going on where we're seeing big name celebrities talking about menopause finally. And the reason that's so great is because of their reach, right? Because
yeah, I must admit, I'm going to probably say something a little bit controversial here. I do.
It's a confessional for a reason, Sonya.
It is a confessional. I do sometimes get irritated by the celebrities, and my reasoning behind that is, and I go back and forward on this in my own head constantly. So let's take Naomi Watts as an example. She came out talking about her menopause story, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And I was so excited for exactly those reasons that you said. She has incredible reach. Women listen to celebrities.
Great.
We're not going to change that. It's great. But the disappointment really hit me about 2 weeks later when it was announced that she was launching a company. She'd bought a healthcare company. She was launching a skincare and supplement range that was specifically targeted at women in their perimenopausal and menopausal years. So I sit in this place where I go, fantastic, yes, preach it, yes, because women are listening to you more than they're listening to me. But did you have to launch a brand around it? Did you have to monetize it? Did you have to go and make it another almost anti-aging thing?
Yeah. Yes. And I think that I think you're right. I think like and you're right, it's quite grey, this area that happens, right? Because there's a lot of products out there that are incredible and are out there supporting women who are, in these years, as we hit the kind of perimenopause years. And I keep banging on about perimenopause as well as menopause, because one thing that I discovered and I was quite shocked about is that perimenopausal symptoms can last like up to 15 years. I mean, that is a reality for some women.
Yeah, well, yeah. So perimenopause is really kind of defined as the 6 to 8 years leading up to your menopause. Menopause is one day in the diary, which is the date of it's been 12 months since your last period. Anything after that is post-menopause. Perimenopause for some women can start as early as 35, which I think we don't talk about enough.
Agreed.
And all the symptoms that you experience during perimenopause can linger for up to 5 to 10 years in postmenopause for some women, not for all women. And I really want to make sure we don't kind of incite fear and negativity around this. But yeah, for some unfortunate women, it is a really long period of time where they are really challenged by some of the symptoms. So the other thing I want to talk about too, while we're on this subject, is from a treatment perspective. So we have MHT, which, is actually an incredible tool for women that are eligible to take it. Not everybody is eligible to take MHT or HRT, as we used to call it. And that includes women that are hormone sensitive, women that have cancer have had cancer, particularly hormone-related breast cancers or ovarian cancers. And there are women that just don't want to take it because they may be more natural in their approach to how they treat their body when it is in a state of needing some support. And those women require just as much support and treatment options available to them. So that's when we also need to start looking at things like lifestyle changes. There's a really good GP will not only sit down and talk to you about hormone therapy, they'll also say, but before we put you onto hormone therapy, let's address your lifestyle issues, because exercise, food, stress management, all of those things play a huge part in managing your perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms. And there are some really significant changes that you can make that will actually make you feel better, give you a longer, we call it health span, which is the period of life that you live where you're really healthy and well. We can extend our health span all by making these, 1% changes almost, and the sooner we start making those, the better. So MHT is amazing as an option for women, but for those that can't take it or won't take it, there are other lifestyle changes, or there's more natural products that you can look at as well for women that aren't compromised by hormone issues in their body. Sorry, yeah. I think I went off on a bit of a tangent.
No, I love that. I love that you did. Like, hey, this is how we are, Sonya. You're like both of us. I think we're the same. No, I love that, because I think that's where the gold comes from, right? I think those are such important points that you're making, and I love that you brought up that some women go through start perimenopause at such a young age. We have a platform and a magazine called Women Beyond 40, WB40, which of course I like to say is a lube for your mind. But WB40, Women Beyond 40, is, it's not just for women beyond 40, because part of the thing about this platform that we're very passionate about is creating an environment which is helpful to our younger sisters in the sisterhood. When they're coming up, it's going to be less scary for them because they've got information, right? Because they're reading about it. But not only that, they're actually seeing lived examples of women who are living their bloody best lives, who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever it may be, who are doing really kick-ass stuff, right?
Well, let's talk about Jane Fonda.
Let's
talk about Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda is 85, okay?
I love her.
She is an absolute boss babe. But if you... So, and I'm bringing her up because I recently listened to a podcast between her and Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And the thing that I loved so much about it was Jane Fonda is really clear on the decisions that she made throughout her life that have allowed her to be a total kick-ass woman at 85. And she talks loudly and proudly about not drinking, getting to a point where she realized she needed to stop drinking alcohol. She has always been into exercise and movement, but really realized how important strength training was going to be for her as she aged. Her nutrition, she went grey naturally. She's just this incredible, vibrant, smart, savvy woman, and she's still working. She's still out there, advocating and agitating like she always has. And she's 85. And, this is what our future can be if we make these, I call 1% changes in our late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah, she is kick-ass. Like, she's extraordinary. I remember when, that television series that she's in with Lily Tomlin, which is just
Frankie
amazing.
and Grace.
Oh, my God, I love it. My son, believe it or not, put me onto that and said, you are going to love this. I checked out an episode. Mum, you're going to love it. And I was like, really? Anyway, my God, I binged that show. I'm so sad it's finished.
I went and visited the set. The set.
Did you?
Yep, in LA.
I'm so jelly.
I was so excited. My boys and my husband were with me, and they were a bit like, okay. And I was like, oh my God. Having this, like, hoping one of them would pop around the corner any moment.
Oh, that would be like a dream come true. Like, I just really loved both of them. Oh my God, love, love, love. And I recently was watching an interview actually with Jane, and they were saying that, she and Dolly Parton and Lily sort of all came together in more recent times celebrating, the anniversary of 9 to 5, etc., and how extraordinary that was. And, they went out, was it the Grammys? And they got like a standing ovation. I think they came out, it could have been the Emmys or the Grammys. I can't remember which one. But she was talking about that, and the three of them went out on stage to present an award, and there was a standing ovation. And she said, I was so shocked, but Dolly was not, because she said before we went out in her southern twang that, we're going to go out there and we're going to get a standing O. And Jane goes, she goes, in my head, I'm like, a what? What? I think for one flashy moment, she thought that the O was an orgasm or something.
An orgasm.
Different kind of O, but they did get a standing ovation. I think that show and shows like it, like Frankie and Grace, so important, because I'm a huge advocate for representation, because we can't be what we can't see.
Exactly.
Right?
We absolutely can't be what we can't see.
Right. Yeah. But watching shows like that, where you have these two extraordinary dynamic women in their 80s, and the characters are saying we're in our 80s, and they're developing like, a vibrator for older women, because, and really pointing out the fact that, things change when you get older, like regardless of how healthy you are, that's the reality. So your skin does get finer, all the things happen, right?
Oh, and I love that. Didn't it come about because Jane had problems with, she had some arthritis in her wrist or something, so they had to create a device that was easier for her to hold.
That's right.
Oh my God, you could not get any more real than that.
It's so great. But then from there, of course, you had like, Lily's character basically coming up with a lube that was all natural, because she said it's not just about the arthritis, it's about vaginal dryness. And they were literally talking about it so openly. Yeah. I thought this is a watershed moment, really. It was just such an extraordinarily gutsy, ballsy thing to do on American television, because they do tend to be quite bizarrely, they're okay with guns, but bizarrely they're really weird about they're really weird about sexuality.
Oh my God, that's so true.
God, so bizarre. But, God forbid we talk about lube, dry vaginas. There, I've said it for all my American listeners out there.
And vulvas.
I'll be laughing.
Vaginas and vulvas.
Oh, yes, vaginas and vulvas, and we should
That's
make
right.
that very clear as well. Very clear.
Yes.
And on that note, and I know, like, I feel very honoured that I have been a guest on your podcast, because I know that I feel like I'm like this little person in amongst all these giants, as you say, all these incredible women who just know so much about all this stuff. It's just, so I was very honoured. But when I was on your podcast, we both talked about the lovely Sandy Davies. So I'm going to shout out to her here too, because Sandy has written several times for WB40 magazine and has been a guest on this podcast as well. And Sandy is this extraordinary woman who, what do they say? That necessity is the mother of invention. So when Sandy...
Oh, and she is a living, breathing example of that.
She's incredible. Yep. So she started her perimenopause journey, and no one had ever told her about, that you may get a dry vulva, a dry vagina. And she was like, what is happening to me? I don't even know. And when she went to the doctor and they said, well, maybe we can get you on some antidepressants or something. And she said, I don't know how that's going to fix my dry vag.
God, I love that woman.
Gold. And so bless her, she went, we'll stuff this. She tried different kinds of, lubricants and different things to help her. And we're talking on a day-to-day basis, not just sex. We're talking like for some women, it is so distressing, like the symptoms that they have, that we're talking like on a day-to-day thing.
Yeah, it's any itching, dryness. She beautifully describes it as like, when you're wiggling in your seat, and you're kind of shuffling and you just can't quite get comfy. And, the other description she uses is it's that sandpaper feeling, and it's, it can actually evolve into different conditions as well. So it's definitely something that can't be left untreated, and I told a story on one of my podcasts to Dr. Adele Piper, who's a Canadian OBGYN that I had on. She's amazing. And I told her the story of my grandmother that I only realize now in hindsight what was probably going on for her at the time, where she'd been sent home from the hospital because she was about to die, and she was having that final kind of gathering with all the family, and so all the grandchildren were there and her children, and she was not well. And I have this really strong, vivid image of her sitting there scratching her downstairs area, and her daughter, who obviously is my aunt, kind of slapping her hand and pulling her hand away from there, and stop that. And it's always stuck with me, that image, because I felt really uncomfortable watching. I felt so much empathy for my grandmother, but I also felt this real role reversal thing going on as well. But it didn't dawn on me until I was having this conversation with Adele around, vulvar dryness and vaginal dryness, that's quite likely what she was experiencing. And she was probably itchy as all hell down there.
Yeah.
And, she was, I can't tell you what age she was when she did pass, but she was probably in her 80s, I would imagine. So she'd potentially been dealing with this for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
And Sandy reached out to me after that podcast went to air, and she said, I was in tears listening to your story about your grandmother. And I thought, how many women have suffered in silence for so long and potentially still do, because we don't talk about it. So let's talk about the vulvas. Let's talk about the vaginas. Let's talk about the fact it shouldn't be itchy and scratchy. And if it is, there is something out there you can do about it.
There is. And, like Sandy's product is called Happy Pause Menopause. I'm going to shout out to it because I genuinely bloody love this product so much. I use it. It's natural, all natural.
Use it on the daily.
There you go. I love it. we are preaching to the converted here, and no, it's not sponsored. Just going to let everyone know. I just love it. I really do.
And on that note, because I actually have a condition called lichen sclerosis as well, which so I see a dermatologist for that. And I actually showed Happy Paws to my dermatologist because she was like, you need to use a daily moisturizer on top of the other meds that I use to control it. And I said, look, I've got a friend that created this product. Can you have a quick look at it and tell me if it's okay for me to use? And she went, oh my God, this is amazing. And I was like, yes. So as much as I believed in Sandy's product, to have my dermatologist look at it and go, wow, this is a really good product. I was like, that everyone needs to know that.
Yeah. And I think especially I've got a couple of friends who've got very, very sensitive skin. And I said to them, look, obviously check it out with, your doctor, or even show your chemist, whatever. But I use this. I love it. I think it's great. Now they're onto it. They love it. So I actually bought a jar for a friend, and then she said, what's the website? Because I'm ordering more. And I think she ordered 10 jars or something at the time. Yeah. But she uses it on the daily as well. I think for a lot of people it's really important. But the beautiful part about that, and I'm absolutely putting it out there, there's a lot of products out there. There are. So, we're not saying you have to get this product, but we're saying there's a lot of products out there for women, so you don't have to suffer needlessly if you're itchy or you're dry or you're uncomfortable.
But do your research on your products. That's the other thing I would say, because
really be
yes,
careful.
there are a lot of products out there, but they're not all necessarily going to be right for you.
Correct.
And, I think one of the things that we need to be so conscious of is what we put on our skin. There are so many products that have these sneaky chemicals tucked into them that, that's going to be absorbed through your skin into your system. And we do need to be really conscious of that as well. So do check the ingredients before you use anything.
Yeah. And I mean, Sandy tells this really great story of, she went out and she bought all these different kinds of products to use and then had a terrible allergic reaction to the chemicals in one, which is how Happy Paws started, right? Because she then went, oh my God, I've literally just burnt my vulva.
Exactly. I've made it worse.
Yeah.
No one wants that.
No, nobody wants that. No, take care down there. That's what I say.
Yes.
I
love it. Take care down there.
Take care down there. Be careful of your pink.
I think we could make a billboard out of that. I'd love to see that.
Take care down there. I love it. I don't even know what we were on then, because I just went sort of off on my own little tangent as well. But I will say that you're right. I think there's a lot of kind of conversation around all of this right now, which is so great, because we were talking about your grandmother. We are the first generation of women, this is a truism, that is openly talking about menopause. And having said that, that open conversation is not happening in all countries, and it's certainly not happening in all households. So it's still seen as this quite a typical, when we see shows like 60 Minutes and they go, taboo, we're breaking the menopause taboo. And I went, what the hell? This is Australian 60 Minutes.
Sorry, am I allowed to say that?
Yes, you are allowed to say
I had a Logan Roy moment then. Fuck off.
It is like, fuck. It's just nuts. I just kind of, that sort of stuff really makes me mad. I get really grumpy about it. But our mothers were not talking about it. Our grandmothers were not talking about it. Now, I was raised by a fierce, disabled little feminist. And she was a tiny little person. Though she be little, she be fierce. And I tell you now, she was fierce, and she talked about bloody everything. And I remember being a teenager and being so embarrassed. Mum, shut up. She'd be saying
that's probably what my boys are like now about me.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure mine are just used to it now. They're like, whatever, Mum's banging on again. But she raised us very openly. She talked about sex, and she talked about periods, and she talked about everything. The one thing she did not talk about was menopause.
Wow.
Right? And sadly, Mum's passed away now.
Much.
Doesn't it say a lot? Yeah. Now, one of two things could have happened. I don't really remember her going through stuff. I don't remember her talking about being hot or hot flushes or whatever. Yep. So one of two things either happened. Either she was extremely lucky where her symptoms were mild and she kind of
which 20% of the population are.
Could be true, or she literally just did not talk about it. It was
literally suffered in silence
thing, and suffered in silence, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I remember, like, you know, trying to find something in my mum's drawer one day and I saw KY jelly and I was young and I remember thinking, what is KY jelly? Because
Oh, yum.
you see jelly, right? You go, oh, I mean, lucky I was old enough. I must have been about 12 or something. I was old enough to realize, well, it's in a tube, but we don't eat it. But,
Yeah.
you know, like.
And it's in mum's panty drawer.
And it's in mum's knickers drawer, man. What's going on here? And I remember asking her and she said, oh, you know, I don't know. I remember she brushed me off and kind of said, oh, you know, love, just don't worry about it. Now, she had a perfect opportunity then to say, well, you know, I've got a bit of, you know, dryness going on, or I need a bit of that when I'm having sex or whatever.
Yeah.
But she didn't. And so now I'm so sad because I think, you know, at an age when I'm going through it, mum's passed away, we can't now have that conversation because I think it would have been a hell of a conversation.
Yeah. But it's interesting. There's still, from what I hear from women, there's still a lot of mothers of that generation that still don't want to talk about it. And they actually get very uncomfortable about the fact that we, the generic we, are talking about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've read articles written by women of that generation that are actually, you know, substantial characters in societies in the countries where the articles were written, you know, asking women to stop talking about it because they feel that it's just going to hold women back further as opposed to move women forward. And I think that those thoughts and feelings and articles come from a place of fear, and that's what they were told and that's what they believe.
Yeah, it's a really awful thing, you know, and I've talked to a lot of women on my podcast about this as well and asked the question, where do you think this comes from? Where do you think this fear comes from? But really, when we think about it, up until our generation, and again, we're breaking like a lot of stereotypes now from, you know, compared to previous generations of what a woman in our age bracket is meant to look like, what we're meant to act like, all of those things. And, you know, depictions of women on television back then were the moment like you had older children, you were already old and, you know, you then became the grandmother figure. I think for a lot of women going through perimenopause, and there was probably no talk about what perimenopause was, not by their GPs and sure as hell not with each other.
No.
And if it was, it would have been done in hushed tones, you know, are you going through this thing? I don't know what it is. But I doubt a lot of that was even going on. I'm thinking about my grandmother's generation, right? So I think it's really, so we are breaking a lot of molds now. But I do think one of the most important gifts we can give, since we are talking about it, is that we've got to talk about this to younger women. The word has to get out. We have to make it such a natural stage of life. Absolutely. Like I am loving now that my daughter, you know, her generation, she's 25, they just openly talk about periods. They talk about period undies. They talk about moon cups. They talk about whatever is going on, right? They talk about sex. They talk about, you know, masturbation. They talk about a whole lot of stuff in a very open way, more so than we were doing when we were their age.
Absolutely. Yep. And, you know, my boys are 20 and 23 pretty much. The things that they talk about, I'm so proud of them. Like, you know, my boys didn't grow up with with sisters, you know, and I was always one of those women that didn't have a lot of friends that had girls. So, you know, but they are totally all over periods. And, you know, I've had an instance where one of my boys' girlfriend was sleeping over and she woke up with a period and he rang me and said, "Mum, do you have any tampons in the house?" And I was like, I went through menopause at 47 because of my breast cancer. I went through medically induced menopause. And, you know, this is 5 years down the track. I was like, "Babe, I'm so sorry, but I totally don't have anything in the house that's going to be helpful, but I'm out and I'm on my way home, so I'll stop at the pharmacy and I'll pick something up for her." And I was so proud of him for that. I was like, you know, I can't imagine sleeping over at you know, when I was that age, having slept at a boy's house going, "Hey, can you call your mum and ask her if she's got a tampon?"
And you know what, though? It's so great, isn't it? How amazing is that? So we're raising our sons to be more aware and make it more normalised, and so it bloody should be, right? Because I think that's the thing. Like, it's so normal for us now to be talking about periods, and it's such an accepted, natural part of life. And I can't wait for the day where menopause is spoken about in exactly the same way, and at the moment it still isn't, as you said. So I am feeling for, as you say, there's still a whole generation of women, who are, old enough to be our mothers, that are suffering still in silence, no doubt. They're not talking about it. They're uncomfortable talking about it. I don't want that for my daughter. I don't want that
No,
for
I don't want
anybody's
that for that
daughters.
whole generation that's coming behind us. And I often talk about how so much of what I do is driven by knowing that this work, this agitation, this advocacy that we do now is really going to pay off for the generations that are coming behind us. And, that is my big driver. It's like, if I can leave this world knowing that I made it a little bit better for the women that are coming behind me, I will be so proud.
Yeah.
Hey there! When Sandy's not interviewing kick-ass women, she's hanging out with me at Alex the Seal, a podcast about music and nostalgia. I'm Jo Pybus, and each episode, Sandy and I talk about all the songs that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up. Do yourself a favour and search Alex the Seal on your podcast app. Love you, Molly!
And that's my driving force as well, and that's why I love you and everything that you do so much, because I think my driving force is exactly that, creating. When people say, why would you want to talk about WB40? When I first started this platform, I love telling the story because it's true. I actually thought, maybe I need investors for this thing because it's pretty big. Like, it's a magazine and it's this and it's that. And I got in touch with some people, put me in touch with these guys who were investors, men, who they said to me, let me give you some advice. I don't think anyone's going to be interested in the stories of women, especially women over 40. That's what they said to me in that meeting. And I remember walking away and I just lit a bloody fire under me, Sonya. It lit the bloody fire because I thought, you know what, fuck you. Fuck you. I'll do it myself.
That whole story about investors doesn't surprise me at all. I have a friend she is brilliant. She has created a brilliant product, all for women, 40 plus. It's an app and it's going to be a game changer. And she is going through the funding stage, and she's pitching constantly to and she is very well connected, and she's pitching to investors in the States a lot of the time. But she says very openly that if she is in front of a male investor, it's very unlikely that they're going to invest in a company that is founded and owned by a woman. She said it's just almost like kind of a given. If you're in front of them and it's a male investor, it's not going to happen.
Not just founded by a woman, but founded by a woman for women who are over the age of 40. And I tell you, so it's quite shocking. I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but less than 1% of global investment goes to women. That's the reality. Goes to female founders and entrepreneurs. It's quite staggering, really.
It is. It really is staggering. Yeah. And it's heartbreaking and it's frustrating, and it's one of those things that if you thought about it enough, it would just leave you so angry that you would probably get paralyzed and not want to keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I probably should have asked you this at the beginning of this podcast, and so weirdly I'm asking you now as we near towards the end, but I think it's really important. I know about you and your story, and I have said this to you previously, and I've said it on your podcast, and I mean this sincerely from the bottom of my heart. Your ability to tell your story and to share your journey with your audience is so heartwarming and so brilliant to me, because I know that you have touched the lives of other people, and I know that it allows, space. And I say grace as well. Like, we have to allow some grace and then the space. Yeah. It gives people almost permission to share their story if they choose to with their friends and family. I'm not saying everybody rushes out and has a podcast like you and I, of course not, but you've allowed women to be able to kind of say, this is happening to me, or I've been through this too and I thought I was alone. And you make people feel less alone, Sonya. You are like quite an extraordinary person with such an incredible kind of gift, I think.
Thank you. That's I feel really seen when you say that, and I don't think we get to experience feeling like that very often. And I'm incredibly grateful that you share that with me, because not everybody does either. And it makes me feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. And that makes me super happy.
Absolutely. And so I
Thank
suppose for
you.
people who are listening along with me here, who are yet to listen to your podcast, but they absolutely should, everybody must rush out, and we'll put obviously all the links will go in the show notes, but and on our socials, because I do want everybody, because I'm a huge fan, to listen to Dear Menopause. But can you just take us through a little bit about that journey, if you feel comfortable doing that, and explain to everyone the sort of journey that you've been on and how you got to be where you are right now?
Yeah, sure. So when I was 47, I literally found a lump in my breast in the shower doing monthly checks. And for some great reason, I had always done monthly checks. I had just read somewhere that you should, and so I did. And I was a personal trainer. I had been a personal trainer at that stage for about 7 years. And I was the fittest, healthiest, happiest that I probably had ever been. I was just in this great place. And I found a lump in the shower. I actually ignored it for probably about a month. It was one of those things where I felt it. Oh, that's weird. And then the next month when it was there and it was a little bit bigger, I was like, okay, hang on. So I literally made an appointment with my doctor the next day and was diagnosed with breast cancer. So that was a real roller coaster for me of all sorts of things. I had surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and then went on to tamoxifen, which is I forget all the right names for things, but it's a drug that basically suppresses the estrogen in your body. Even though I'd gone through menopause by that point, I went into medically induced menopause. So it was a real shit show of a year, literally. And I was diagnosed, actually, what's the date?
Today's the 21st.
Pretty much this week, 6 years ago.
Wow.
Which is also pretty much the week before my birthday. So it's a funny time of year for me now, my birthday, because it's also the anniversary of my breast cancer diagnosis. And that whole year then pretty much became a shit show for me of being very, very unwell and really struggling to come to terms with the fact that I went from literally one day being on, like, I have a photo on my phone and I keep it specifically. It's of me and a friend. And we had done, if you live in Sydney, you know, we'd swum from Manly Beach to Shelley Beach and back. So it's an ocean swim. It was the first time I'd done it. She'd been doing it, but we had done some swimming lessons together to prepare us to go and do it. And, we went and did it, and the next day I got my diagnosis. And I have this photo because I was so happy and I ticked this incredible box off, and and it was a physical accomplishment, and it's just a really beautiful, joyful photo. And then the next day I got the diagnosis. So anyway, it took me a good 3 or so years of healing, physically, emotionally, spiritually. My body image was absolutely shot. I put on about 10 kilos for all sorts of different reasons: menopause, drugs, comfort eating, the works. It took me probably a good 3 years to come back to wanting to be feeling well enough to be a personal trainer again, because when you're a personal trainer, you believe that people want you to look a particular way, and you're healthy and you're fit and you're vibrant and you're this role model. And anyway, my husband said to me one day, so we converted our garage into a gym, and this all ended up being kind of right at the start of COVID. And he said to me one day, you should start training clients out of the garage. And I laughed and went, "That'd be ridiculous. Like, who's going to want to come and train in my garage? Like, it's a dusty, filled with all our crap garage. Yes, it's got some gym equipment in it." I went, "Well, okay." So I kind of pondered that for about a week, and then I put a post up into our community Facebook group. And by the end of that week, I had 5 clients.
Wow.
And I made the decision really early on that I was only going to train women and predominantly women 40 plus. So for 2 years, I ran a gym out of our garage, and we went through COVID openings and closings. But whilst I was, and I ran classes, so I had groups of women together. But what I realized was happening in those classes where the women were talking about, I created this really accidentally really safe space for women to talk about what was going on in their lives. And the conversations that were coming up were all around what I knew was perimenopause, but they didn't. And I had this real moment of realization of, oh my God, I felt unsupported and uneducated and alone and very isolated during my experience, but I thought that was because it was medically induced and I was going through cancer at the same time. But the average woman was feeling just as isolated, just as unsupported, and just as uneducated. And because I'm a helper and I'm a teacher and I'm, natural talker, and I'm a natural researcher, I went away and did all this research, and then I started having conversations with them, and I realized that the information that I was able to share with them was making profound impacts on their quality of life. Some of them went and saw doctors and got help. Some of them were able to have conversations with their partners. They just felt seen, a little bit like, the feedback that you gave me before. They just felt seen. And so then I was like, okay, now I need to go and do something else with this. And that was pretty much the birth of the Stellar Women business that has a few different arms to it. And Dear Menopause became a big part of that. So that is a very long-winded version of my story.
It's an incredible story. It really is. And, there's a few things and there's so much in that story to unpack. And why
I know it's a whole podcast episode of its own.
It really is on its own. But what I do love, and that little gem that you just slipped in there, is that you didn't become a personal trainer till you were about 40.
I was 40.
There you go. And I love that. So this whole thing about, women feeling like when they hit 40, when they hit 50, when they hit 60, society's telling me that I'm done. I call bullshit on that.
Oh, totally.
Right?
I did two things
40.
when I turned 40. I love birthdays, like always have. And, birthdays obviously to me now are even more to be celebrated than they used to be. But I've always celebrated. I've always called my birthday the Festival of Sonya. And when I turned 40, I did two things. I became a personal trainer. I started studying when I was in about 39. The other thing that I did was that I went to Everest Base Camp by myself.
Wow.
It was a goal that I'd had for a very long time, and I couldn't find anyone else to go with me. I had decided that I wanted to go there before I turned 40. So I turned 40 in the May, and I went to Everest Base Camp in the February.
Unbelievable. That is phenomenal. And so how long does it take to get there to base camp? Because it's huge. My God, that's massive.
Yeah, I was away from home for 3 weeks, and the actual trek itself I think we were away for about 10 or 11 days.
Yeah, wow. I think it's kind of really interesting. I have had another guest on this podcast who's actually done it as well, gone to base camp. What a lot of people think of, because they call it base camp, people assume it's at the bottom of the mountain, right? But base right? And then you say to people, no, it's like a 10-day trek or whatever it is up there. And a lot of people who really want to climb the summit of Everest, they sort of get up there and they get to base camp and then they say, you'll never make it. Like, you can't get up there. And they can stop people from actually going.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't even make it to base camp. So for context, Everest is just over 8,000 meters from sea level. Base camp is at 5,800 meters, I think it is. So, it's only another 3,000 meters from base camp to the top of Everest.
But it's fraught, right? And it's fraught getting to base camp as well.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating talking to people who've done it, and they kind of go, they trained so hard and their fitness levels were so high. And I have actually met people who said, no, I didn't even get that far. I just didn't make it.
If you get altitude sickness, then the only way to get over altitude sickness is to turn around and go back down. And to save your life, that is what you will have to do. And so there are a lot of people that don't make it. Even to base camp. Yeah.
Wow. It's so funny. Have you ever seen, I'm not sure if I have to think about what it's called. There's a movie out there. It's based on a very true story of a young French guy who weirdly wants to win the heart of a woman, and he ends up climbing Mount Everest to prove to her that he can commit to something.
I have not seen that one.
It's called The Climb.
Okay.
I'll shout out to it. It's amazing. It's a French film with subtitles. It's a bit of a comedy the way that they've done it, but it's a true story. This kid really did it. And I say kid because, I don't know, he was like only in his 20s or something. Yeah. He had no climbing experience, had never done any training when he went up the mountain, by the way, none. And
no wonder it's a comedy.
Right, and then he met all these kind of amazing. He got to base camp, and there were climbers there who were from Australia, from the UK, from Germany, from everywhere, I think, around the world, who kind of said to him, what the hell are you doing? You know, you're never going to make it. He had no equipment. Like, this is the most amazing thing. He sort of made it that far with very little. And then when he got that far, they realised he was so determined to do it that they were giving him tips.
Yeah, they would have lent him stuff. Yeah, the climbing community is pretty amazing.
Huge community, but they sort of rallied behind him.
Yeah.
And he made it. He actually climbed Everest, which is so bizarre, just to prove to this girl, see, I love you. I can commit to something.
That's a huge feat. That's a huge feat. Yeah.
Massive. But it's one of those amazing stories because it's like anything. If he had have known what was ahead of him, would he have done it? And the answer was no. He would not.
No, yeah.
Crazy. And it was probably that innocence that kind of got him there in the first place, that drove it, right? Oh, my God, I can't even believe it's bizarre. I love that you have such a pioneering spirit, and I love that you continue every day to kind of shake the tree and break the mold, and I love that about you, Sonya. I think that you're a bloody powerhouse. You're incredible. I love everything that you do at Stellar Women. I love everything that you do for Dear Menopause. I love that you're advocating for all of us. And by us, I mean the collective us of women who are in this age demographic and who are going through this stage of our lives. And I love that you were out there talking, advocating about health and advocating about help and advocating about, you know, finding a spark and a joy in your life. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. That means the world to me. And I appreciate you. I appreciate this opportunity, every opportunity that I get to chat about women and about what I'm doing and about the difference that we can all make in the world. You know, I grab it with both hands. So thank you for having me, and thank you so much for providing this platform where you share so many amazing stories from amazing women as well. And I think that's just as important.
Thank you so much, Sonya. And also thank you so much for sharing your personal journey with us here today as well. And on that note, please, ladies, check your boobs.
Yes, check your boobs, look after down there, and talk to your GP.
That's it. And understand that you are not alone.
Yeah, most importantly.
Thank you so much for joining me in the confessional today.
Thanks, Sandy.
Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional Podcast. The Good Girl Confessional Podcast is brought to you by WB40, Women Beyond 40 magazine. Available now at WB40.com. The Good Girl Confessional Podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.